Marin Municipal Water District's second public workshop to talk about our proposed rate increase. The format tonight is a brief overview from senior staff, followed by somewhat of a brief opportunity to wander around and talk to the staff that does the work, any questions you may have, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. All those questions and comments will be recorded, and we're compiling them and provide them to the board. I do expect that we'll have a board member, Armando Quintero, showing up shortly, who represents the San Rafael area. So with that, my name, by the way, is Ben Ornstein. I'm the general manager of the district, and I have a few slides, and we'll roll through this, and this will go fairly quickly, this part. So this slide is a illustration of comparatively the Marin Water District's infrastructure, number of connections, and our infrastructure, miles of pipes, tanks, and pump stations as it compares to others. It's up here just to share notably that the amount of infrastructure we have when you look at tanks and pump stations really dwarfs other comparably sized agencies, and in fact is somewhat in the ballpark of East Bay Mud that has maybe 5 or 6 times the population. The reason we're sharing this particular slide is just to reflect when we look at where we are on comparable rates. You would expect us to be on the very, very high end, given the nature of the infrastructure we have, as well as the fact that we manage, as you all know, a very large and complex watershed in the mountain. And in fact, when we get to the comparable rates, you see we're actually not where this would be indicated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. In fact, here it is. Comparable rates today, this is prior to the proposed rate increase. We're on the very low end, and these places don't have a watershed, for example, over here. But based on the prior slide, as a practitioner in the industry, you would expect currently we'd be on the very high end. This bar is with the proposed rate increase, somewhat in the middle, approaching the higher end, certainly. So a bit of a jump, and we'll talk about the proposed rate increase as we get through the program tonight. This slide is to share the history of rate increases in the district. And the green bars indicate the many years, something like maybe 14 of the last 25 years, there was no rate increase. And you know, that's happened over time. This lower gray line shows if in 1990 we had increased rates strictly just at the cost of inflation using an index, we would be close to where we are, but we'd be higher. The point being that since 1990 on average, the rate increases at the district have been below the inflation rate. I'd say from my experience that does suggest a relatively financially prudent approach to rates and responding to the interests of the community. This gives you a picture of where the money goes on a percentage basis. Certainly dominated, as you would expect, by the operational treatment and distribution of water, followed by capital in our fire flow upgrade program, pipeline maintenance. So the bulk of this is core business. This orange is water purchases. We purchase about maybe 15% of our water supply from Sonoma Water. And a big chunk is watershed management, water conservation, customer services, with some overhead and debt service. So this is basically on a dollar total budget basis where the money goes. So with that, I'll hand this off to Charlie Duggan, our financial treasurer.
Good evening, everyone. So, in talking about our rates, of course, the question in the previous slide shows where the money is going on a pie chart, a variety of areas. One area is our aging infrastructure. Our district is over 100 years old, and we have pipes that are actually older than the district because the district was formed from several other districts, private entities that were created before the MOWD became the first special water district in the state. We have growing demands on the watershed, including, of course, wildfire mitigation, and we want to try to protect people as much as possible from the threat of wildfire on our watershed. The rates include really two components. One is an increase to the tiered rates, the fixed charges, the meter service charge, and the watershed fee that appear on the bi-monthly bill now. The increases will produce a 4% revenue increase for the district, and that's planned for each year for the 4 years. The second fee is a capital maintenance fee. That fee is to fund the capital program, which replaces the 900 miles of pipes over time, the pump station maintenance, the retrofitting of our water treatment plants for seismic events, everything under the sun as far as our capital needs. Specifically, this is the chart showing what the charges are for the capital maintenance fee. It is meter-based, meaning that the size of someone's meter shows the potential usage and demand on the whole system. So when we're looking at sizing how much water we need to have treated every day in the treatment plants, how much water we need to transmit through our major transmission lines to the neighborhoods that are then fed by other mains and laterals to the houses, the size of the meter, it gives us an indication of how prepared we need to be for those peak times, especially in the summer. So a 5/8" meter is up at the top, right here. As you can see, 41,000 plus of our accounts, 68% of all customers make up this category. And so the annual charge per meter is $1.63. The bi-monthly charge is going to be around $27 per bill. And then it falls from there, 3/4 inch, $245, 1 inch, $408, and on down. So if you look at our single-family residential customer, 41,000 of them have the 5/8" meter. The current bill is about $57 per month. And so the monthly increase we're showing for the operating is $2.71. When you combine that with the capital maintenance fee broken down monthly, that's an additional $13.63. So the total increase is $16.34 for a 5/8" meter. So a few things that aren't in the proposal, the 218 notice that was sent out to everyone. since then, the board has met and given the staff some direction on drafting the rate ordinance. And so that's what they'll be considering on May 28th is the draft rate ordinance. And so a super saver program for a service charge waiver program for low-income residents already exists. If you are at 60% of the HUD low-income guidelines for Marin County, you would qualify for our program. The board has asked us to raise that to 80%. Currently, if you're a family of four and you make the combined income of the family is $118,000 or less, then you qualify as low income in Marin County. The Super Saver Water Program, this is a new program where we're going to, each month when we run the bills, we're going to look and see who has the lowest consumption over the last 12 months. And if you fall in the lowest 3,000 customers that have used the least amount of water over the last 12 months, you get an $8 credit on your bill. There's no application that has to be made. This will be automatic. Every time we run the bills, we'll do the calculation to see who falls into that. We have meters that have been upsized because of requirements to have fire suppression systems, fire sprinklers, or significant pressure issues. The house is quite high on the hill and the meter is quite low, so the pressure issues cause them to have a larger meter size. We're building in a process where we can have folks apply for us to look at what their meter size should be without either the fire suppression system or the pressure demands. And if they qualify for a lower meter, lowering the CMF charge by 1 meter size down. So we're looking at that process. And then the CMF collection method, right now the proposal for the ordinance will be that it will show up on the bi-monthly bill for the first 2 years and then migrate to the property tax statement after the first 2 years. Next, Mike Bond is going to be coming up and telling you a bit more about our infrastructure.
Thank you, Charlie. My name is Mike Bond. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I am the manager of the Environmental and Engineering Services Division here at the district, and basically our job is taking care of your water system so that when you turn on the tap, you get clean, refreshing, great tasting water. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that water system and then also our plans to take care of the system, what we've done in the past, and what we plan to do for the next 10 years. So let's start with our water sources. We're fortunate to have 4 water sources here at the Marin Municipal Water District. The first is recycled water. We get about 2% of our water supply from recycled water. We use recycled water for landscape irrigation, for toilet flushing in office buildings, also at the Marin County Jail, and also we have several car washes that use recycled water. Our second source is water that we import from Sonoma County. That comprises about 21% of our water supply. Our third source is water that falls on our Mount Tam watershed and also the grassy hills of West Marin and flows into our 7 reservoirs. That's nearly 80% of our total water supply. And our fourth supply is conservation. Yes, we look at conservation as another supply for us. Conservation keeps water in our reservoirs and it ensures the water will be there when you need it. The other thing is that conservation means we don't have to go after costly water supplies. Today, we're using about 30% less water than we did 30 years ago. That means today we're not talking about a desalination plant or some other costly new water supply. And that's because of our good conservation program. So let's spend a few minutes just talking about your water system. Most of the water that we produce starts with rainfall up on Mount Tam. We get about 52 inches of water on Mount Tam. And that water flows to our 7 reservoirs. From our reservoirs, about 13,000 acre-feet of water, or about 30% of the water that we store in the reservoirs, goes for habitat benefit. We release that water from Lake and also Sewickley Reservoir into Lagunitas and Walker Creeks for habitat. The rest of that water is conveyed to our treatment plants. Now, the water in our reservoirs, you can't drink it. It has bacteria and other sediments that need to be removed before you can drink the water. And that happens at our 2 water treatment plants. This is a photograph of our San Geronimo treatment plant, which is located in San Geronimo. It was built in the 1960s. It actually produces about 50% of all the water we produce and distribute. It takes about 5 hours for the water to be converted from raw water to water that we can drink. So we have 2 water treatment plants, one in San Geronimo, one up on the watershed, which we call our Bontempi treatment plant. And then we also have a treatment plant in Nevada, which is where we take water from the Sonoma County Water Agency. So how do we go about conveying that water from our 3 treatment facilities to 190,000 customers that are spread out over a 147 square mile area? So that's when it really gets interesting for us. The other thing about that water system is we have to be able to deliver water when our customers need it night or day. We deliver about 15 million gallons per day during the winter time, and during the summertime, that goes up to about 30 million gallons per day. So the way we do that is we have a very extensive water system. That water system comprises about 900 miles of pipes, 128 storage tanks, 97 pump stations, and all of those facilities have to be working in order for water to get from our reservoirs to our customers. So let's talk about how we keep that system in good working condition. The primary way we do that is through our capital improvement program. I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about what we've done over the last 10 years, the investments that we've made, and then what we're planning to do for the next 10 years. So in the last 10 years, we've invested about $200 million in our water system. And that includes replacing 34 deficient storage tanks, recoating 10 storage tanks, replacing 74 miles of deficient pipe, and seismically upgrading your 2 water treatment plants. So what did that get for us, that $200 million investment? What did we get? Well, on the pipeline replacement side, one of the benefits replacing 74 miles of pipe has done for us is our water main break rate has actually gone down about 50% over the last 20 years. We used to experience about 300 breaks per year. Now the rate is about 150 breaks per year. And that means less disruption to the community, less water loss, and also less time that we're out in the field taking care of our water main breaks. This photograph behind me is a project that we completed in the town of Corte Madera in 2017. It was our Elm Avenue pipeline replacement project. And I wanted to show this to you just to illustrate some of the complexity of our pipeline replacement projects. When we do a pipeline project like this, we're working in your front yards, we're working in the backyards, we're in your streets, in your neighborhoods, we're in your downtowns, in front of your businesses. And so there's a lot of coordination that has to go on with our customers and also the neighbors that surround the project. We're not out in the middle of a field where we can do as we please. We have to be very strategic about the work we do because we know this work can be disruptive to the community. We spend a lot of time working with other communities and also with residents in these neighborhoods. And when we finished this project, the towns of Corte Madera and Larkspur followed us and paved the streets that we had just finished working on. So hopefully these folks won't see any of us for a long, long time. On the infrastructure investments, that we've done over the last 10 years, they've greatly improved the seismic reliability of our treatment plants. Both Bontempi and San Geronimo were built in the 1960s. We know a lot more today about what it takes for a structure to survive an earthquake. So we seismically upgraded the filters at both Bontempi and San Geronimo. San Geronimo treatment plant is located 5 miles away from the San Andreas Fault. So we breathed a collective sigh of relief when we got that project finished. The other accomplishments that our investments have done for us is they greatly improved the firefighting capability of our water system. We've replaced about 39 miles of fire flow efficient pipe. We've increased the flow capacity by doing that at 400 fire hydrants. And then through our redwood tank replacement program, we've replaced 31 redwood storage tanks in the last 10 years. Now that sounds like a lot, and it is, but there's a lot more to do. And let me tell you why that's the case. So, as was mentioned earlier, we're the oldest municipal water district in California, incorporated in 1912, we're over 100 years old. We've got a rich history at the district, but that also means our infrastructure is very old. 2 out of 3 of our treatment plants are over 50 years old. 55 of our storage tanks are over 50 years old. 11 of them are over 75 years old. That's really old for a storage tank. On the pipeline side, we've got 900 miles of pipeline. Half of that pipeline is over 50 years old. 76 miles is over 75 years old, and we still have about 14 miles of 100-year-old pipe. Now, the interesting thing about pipe is age is not the only indicator of condition. Another important factor is the material. And our distribution system was largely built in the 50s and 60s. The material for pipe of choice back then was cast iron. And unfortunately, we now know that cast iron is not a very good pipe material. It doesn't last very long, and when it fails spectacularly. And I just want to share a little story with you about that. So back in June 10th, we had a failure of an 8-inch cast iron pipe on Olema Road in Fairfax. We lost about 200,000 gallons of water and flooded the street. And the source of that leak was this crack right here in the 8-inch cast iron main. If you want to learn more about this project, this repair, or any other repairs that we do when we break here, I invite you to talk to Evan and the field crews over here. These are the guys that are out there every day repairing our water main breaks. So this cast iron pipe, even though we've been very diligent about replacing old pipe, we still have about 300 miles of it out there. And it's not cheap to replace pipe. In today's dollars, it costs us about $1.5 million to replace 1 mile of pipe. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing over the next 10 years. In your water system, we'll be investing about $232 million in capital improvements over the next 10 years, which will be funded by the capital maintenance fee that Charlie mentioned, which is really exciting for us because for the first time we have a dedicated funding source for our capital program. And the capital program, it never ends. We are continually investing in the water system so that it will be here today and tomorrow and for a long, long time. So over the next 10 years, we plan to invest about $112 million in pipeline replacement and also in our pump stations, $36 million in watershed projects, and Crystal's going to be talking about some of that in just a minute. We'll be investing $30 million in storage facilities and $20 million in our treatment plants. And I'm just going to end here by talking about a couple projects that we'll be doing over the next 10 years. So I mentioned earlier at our treatment plants, we completed a project to upgrade the filters. This is an aerial shot of our San Geronimo treatment plant. The filters that we seismically upgraded are right here. Our next project is to seismically upgrade the clarifiers, which are the round tanks you see in the foreground here. Overall, we'll be investing about $20 million in your treatment plants over the next 10 years. We also plan to invest $96 million in the replacement of about 50 miles of deficient pipe. One of the projects we'll be doing is to replace about a mile of pipe on Sir Francis Drake from Ross Terrace to Manor Road. And we're doing this in coordination with the County of Marin's Sir Francis Drake Road Rehabilitation Project. We'll be investing $30 million in storage facilities, and most of that money will be going towards two projects, one of which is to replace our Ross Reservoir. This is a 90-year-old tank that holds about 1 million gallons. It's reaching the end of its useful life, and it's undersized. So we're going to replace it with a new concrete tank about 4 million gallons worth of storage will greatly benefit the San Geronimo Valley when we do that. That project will cost about $16 million. We are also going to be upgrading our Smith Saddle storage tanks. These two tanks hold about 10 million gallons, and annually, about 40% of all the water we distribute in the district, about 40% of it at one time is stored in these two tanks, and they're critical to our distribution system. The tanks are made out of welded steel, which is a great tank, but it needs to have a corrosion inhibitor to prevent it from corroding. So we'll be recoating the tanks so that we'll get another 30 to 50 years of life out of these two tanks. But again, that project's about $7 million. And that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions about our capital improvement program, I invite you to talk to Lucy and Jeff over on our engineering table. They can tell you all about the details and about what we'll be doing over the next 10 years. So with that, I'd like to ask Crystal Yesman, our Facilities and Watershed Manager, to come on up.
Thank you, Mike. And thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about our watershed. We all live in the shadow of Mount Tam, and we hold this area for very dear for water supply and recreational benefits. Over the next couple of years, we'll be increasing the watershed budget by $1.6 million. And part of that increase will be coming from the capital maintenance fee to support our wildfire protection efforts. As you know, we have 21,000 acres of publicly accessible watershed with over 2 million visitors a year. We have 85 miles of biking trails and fire roads to maintain and 144 miles of hiking trails. Over the last 20 years, we've invested over $17 million in our fisheries program, which is tied to our water rights for Laguness Creek. And some of the details of the budget here include, sorry about that. The investments include projects that involve vegetation and wildlife management, watershed maintenance. We have heavy equipment purchases planned for the next 2 years, including a new track chipper and a large excavator to help with vegetation management for wildfire protection. Also in this budget is our protection program for watershed, including our ranger program, fisheries program, and then the trails and hiking trails, as I mentioned. So the risk of wildfire in the watershed. We're very concerned about that. We've been meeting continuously with Marin County Fire and coordination efforts to reduce the risk of wildfire to our watershed. As land managers of Marin, we take this very seriously. There's over 13,000 structures within 1 mile of our watershed and over 25,000 structures within 2 miles. And we work closely with the private landowners that abut our boundaries to help them with their defensible space. We're also considered a Tier 3 fire risk for utility-caused fires. And so we work closely with PG&E to ensure veg management around the lines that run through the watershed. We have over 400 utility poles in the watershed, and PG&E has been working to replace them, the wooden poles, with metal. We also are on high risk according to CAL FIRE's risk ratings. And we have increased fuel loads in the watershed from not only fire suppression, we haven't had a large fire since 1945, but also disease from sudden oak, invasive species, and Douglas fir intrusion into our grasslands. If there was a large fire, it also impacted our water supply and water quality, so it's something we spend a lot of effort mitigating. Here's some photos from some of the work that we engage in the watershed, and you're welcome to talk to our Ridge Management Natural Resources Program Manager more during the break. But we use a skid steer to masticate the fuel load in the understory. This is forestry work that we're working within the watershed. We've identified it's 2,000 acres where this work can be done. We also have a medium excavator with a mower head, and we do a side mower along all the fuel breaks. We have our own crews of wildland firefighters. We have 12 staff that are trained, and we do prescribed burns on the mountain to pile burns to reduce the fuel load from Douglas fir abatement. And then, of course, we're also looking at alternative methods such as goats. We're working with Fire Safe Marin on some grazing efforts throughout the watershed. And when we do this work, we have to be aware and cognizant of the fact that we have 900 species of plants and 400 species of animals, including 77 rare, threatened, and endangered species. So we do a lot of work to monitor ahead of our heavy equipment to ensure that we're not impacting those species. And some of the approaches that we're taking to reduce the wildfire risk is that we have 1,000 acres of fuel breaks that we maintain, and over 100 miles of fire roads that are used for emergency access. In terms of fire response, I mentioned that we have trained wildland firefighters. We're typically first on scene for ignition events. We have a Type 3 fire engine and a water tank tender. We also have 2 Type 6 fire apparatus and 3 Type 7s. We work very closely with Marin County Fire on fire response. We also participate in the urban search and rescue efforts that you hear about in the news on the watershed. And also, as I mentioned previously, the Vegetation Management Program recently published the draft EIR for our revision of our vegetation management program. That's out for public comment right now, and comments are due in June, and we're hoping to get that finalized so we can expand the work that we do for vegetation management on the mountain. And coordinating with the other agencies in Marin, including Marin County Fire, the Conservation Corps, Fire Safe Marin, we helped to author the community wildfire protection plan that was published 2 years ago by the county in terms of what can be done to reduce fire risk for our communities. So with that, we're going to take a short break, and we have comment cards here at the front. So please, if you would like to speak at the podium and provide your comments to us, if you could fill out a card and hand it in to one of our staff members. We'll take a short 10 to 15 minute break, and then we'll reconvene for public comment. Yes, and please feel free to walk around and talk to staff and learn more about the work that we do at Marin Municipal Water District.
Stop it now. That's just wasting energy.